perhaps it can be said that from the moment we became aware that we were not the body, we've had to reconcile and solve many paradoxes. Some of the deep ones being time and timelessness, stillness and movement, being in the world but not of the world, feeling empty and yet being always full of perceptions, awarenesses, experiences. But there's a final paradox that has to be resolved before it can be said that we've arrived at that state which is called by many names: moksha, liberation, God realization, enlightenment. But what is this final paradox that confronts us and has to be resolved before we can stand ever free of doubts, fears, vacillations, and so on? Knowing that paradoxes cannot be resolved by the mind, we have the recourse to stories to perhaps allow us to divine what those paradoxes were, and indeed what this final paradox is. So there are several more stories that give us the possibility of being able to recognize what it is that has to be reconciled. The first is that story about Nerada, the very great devotee of the god Krishna, who one day when he was sitting at the feet of Krishna said to the master, "Master, tell me, what is Maya?" And Krishna said, "I'll be happy to tell you what Maya is, but first I'm very, very thirsty, and I wonder, will you go and bring me a cup of fresh water from the well?" So Nerada immediately rose up and went to fulfill his master's wish. But when he came to the well, there was a young maiden there drawing water into her pitcher, and he asked her would she do so for him, and she gladly said that she would. But in this course of interaction, they got into conversation, and the time passed very quickly because they found themselves deeply involved in each other's stories. And the day had passed, and the maiden said, "Look, the sun is going down, it's getting late, and I live in a farm not very far away. Would you like to come back to my farm, have a meal?" And Nerada gladly conceded. He was certainly enjoying her company. So he went back with the maiden to the farmhouse and was invited to enjoy their hospitality, warm soup and crusty bread and the like that you find in such establishments. And in the course of their exchanges, the farmer said, "Well, you know, I have need of someone at my farm to bring in the crops. It's now that time when reaping and the harvest has to be brought in. Would you consider assisting me?" Well, Radha was so taken with this maiden and having the opportunity to continue the interaction with her, he gladly accepted this, and so it went on that, after bringing in the crops and so forth and becoming more and more accustomed to the warmth of the hearth in which he'd found himself and deeply falling in love with the maiden, that of course the inevitable happened. They decided to be wed, and after they were wed, they had several children, and they became very prosperous, and so life was very rich for Nerada. But then one day, when he was standing out in the middle of the field, he heard a great roaring sound, thunderous. And as he looked at the horizon, he saw a great wave coming in, a great tsunami, and he felt it washing away his farm, his children, his wife, and himself. Suddenly, he found himself back at the feet of the god Krishna. Krishna said, "Nerada, where have you been? I've been waiting this hour for you." But Nerada said, but I had a life, I had a farm, I had children, I was rich and prosperous. And Krishna said, "My beloved devotee, this is Maya." Then there's that story about the great emperor, King Solomon, known for the fact that he had mastered all the ways of existence. Did he not have the ring on his finger that gave him the power of God, knowing the greatest name of all? He had power, not only the aspects of life, but the wind, the rain, and so on. But Solomon, even though he had all of the knowledge of creation, there was one thing that he yearned for, and that was to know the nature of illusion. Now Solomon had captured the king of the devils, the king of the demons, Ashmonidi, and had kept him in chains deep down in the depths of his palace. So one day he brought up Ashmonidi in his chains, knowing that Ashmonidi, this devil, this king of the demons, could answer this question. He said to Ashmonidi, "I will give you your freedom if you will answer the question for me. What is illusion?" Ashmonidi said, "I will answer this question for you if you release me from my chains and give to me the ring on your finger, which contains the sacred name of God." So great was Solomon's desire to have this question answered that he took off the ring from his finger, unchanged Ashmonidi, and gave him the ring. Immediately Ashmonidi took the ring and flung it so that it went out of the window and flew far, far away to a great ocean. And as it descended into the ocean, it was followed by a great fish, swallowed. But in that moment, Solomon found himself washed up on a far distant shore, no longer in his royal trappings, no longer having any evidence even of the powers that he had. So struggling to find his way, of course we can make the story that followed from him, crawling up the sands, being found by a fisherman, being given solace and hospitality, taught the ways of the fisherman, finding himself in a great city where suddenly he found that he did have skills that were found out by the king. So he became a chef in the king's kitchen. He became a server at the table of the king. He came to meet and know the daughter of the king. They fell in love. But when the king heard that his daughter had fallen in love with a kitchen hand, a mere servant, he shunned them, sent them away. So they had to go into the desert and make a life for themselves. And they did. They found an oasis. He used his skills to make themselves an abode. They had children. And so the story goes on. But then again, one day, a great wave came. A great wave that Solomon saw approaching. So he grabbed his children, he grabbed his wife. But soon they were washed away, washing he himself back to that place where Ashmonidi also said, "Where have you been, my king? You have been gone this while." But strangely, at the end of this tale, just before Solomon found himself back in the presence of the great king of the demons, in his time in the ocean, the fish had regurgitated his ring, which he placed on his finger. So standing before the great demon king, Solomon was back to the place where he had the power of all knowledge, all of existence. But then Ashmonidi said to him, "Great king, this is the nature of illusion." King Solomon gave Ashmonidi his freedom. What is this paradox that has to be arrived at before we can stand ever free in that state with many names, but never again in doubt or confused? No longer moving between the two sides of the coin, but resting forever in that place where all paradoxes of all natures are reconciled, solved, without any machinations, without any effort of mind. What is this final paradox that must needs be solved? And how do these stories to recognize what it is. In fact, it has to be resolved. What is this paradox for us?
Is it